Nervod. I am Tad Larkin, the lore master of Manda-LORE, and today I'll be digging through the archives to elaborate on the venerable Rogue Squadron.
As is customary with Rogue Squadron's luck, the festivities in the wake of the aftermath of Endor were short-lived, as an urgent message drone appeared from the Imperial world of Bakura, which was under attack from a yet-to-be-seen race from the unknown regions. Now reformed as Rogue Squadron after ceremoniously returning to their Red Squadron moniker for the Battle of Endor, Wedge and the Rogues accompanied Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, and an Alliance task force to Bakura, where the Bakurans, expecting an Imperial relief force, reluctantly agreed to a ceasefire and accepted aid from their rebel enemies. They discovered that the Saurian Sea Rook of the Sea Ruvi Imperium were working with traitors within the Bakuran government to help them in-tech their populace, which would in turn help power their warships. But with Rogue Squadron flying during the battle, that was quickly put to an end, and the Sea Ruvi Imperium was driven back to the unknown regions after subsequent engagements. In the Galactic Standard month between the Emperor's death at Endor and the declaration of the New Republic, the Alliance to restore the Republic temporarily reorganized into the Alliance of Free Planets, in the interim while a new constitution, as well as the new declaration itself, was being drafted. Luke Skywalker led Rogue Squadron on a scouting mission to Coronet, the capital city of Corellia, to gather intel and prepare for future liberation, when they were discovered and attacked by Commander Weir's Storm Commandos, but Ten Numb was captured and held in the neighboring world of Trallis, where the Rogues failed to rescue their Celestin comrade while defeating Weir. Not long after their failed mission in the Corellia system, a new race of invaders entered the stage, this time from an entirely different galaxy. The deadly Nagai had been scouting the galaxy for some time, and had deemed the time right to strike in the wake of the power vacuum left by the crumbling Empire. The Alliance of Free Planets suffered several defeats at the hands of the Nagai. However, when their temporary HQ at Endor was threatened, Rogue Squadron flew with Fen Shisa's Mandalorian protectors to defend the Forest Moon. Hostilities between the Nagai and the Alliance were successfully ended with the appearance of the Nagai's own enemies, the Toff, who had chased them out of their home galaxy. And at the Battle of Saijo, the Rogues flew a sortie against the Toff flagship, while Nagai and Alliance ground troops conducted joint operations to capture the Toff Prince, who was secretly backed by Lumaya, the Dark Lady of the Sith, otherwise known as former Rogue herself, Shira Bree. The conclusion of the Nagai-Tof War coincided with the formal declaration of the New Republic, and a provisional council was established to oversee the government until more worlds could be liberated from Imperial and Warlord holdings. And with this, Luke Skywalker officially resigned from Rogue Squadron to continue along his Jedi path, leaving Wedge in command for good. Wedge, in turn, led the Rogues to the Imperial-held world of Kilpar, where they were supposed to escort a food convoy from the Kilpar resistance to Merlist. However, Wes Jansen's X-Wing was shot down as soon as they got there, and while Tycho Celchu landed to recover Wes, they encountered New Republic agent Winter Raytrack, who helped the Rogues reunite and deal a major blow to the Imperial occupation on Kilpar. Back to Merlist, their intended destination, Wedge and the Rogues were ambushed again, but this time some well-placed proton torpedoes fired at an interdictor star destroyer allowed them through, where Wedge would represent the New Republic in negotiations for what would turn out to be a hoax piece of technology called the Phantom Project. While the New Republic was well aware that the Phantom Project wasn't real, the Empire was not, and Captain Loka Hask, the former pirate and the man responsible for the death of Wedge's parents, would stop at nothing to pursue it, working with the Anti-Endor Association, a militant group that believed the Battle of Endor never happened, to cause unrest on Merlist. But he was ultimately foiled by the Rogues working with smuggler Mirax Terek, when they used an experimental gravitic polarization beam to destroy Hask's interdictor. Next, Rogue Squadron accompanied Winter on a mission to Tatooine to steal a data disk from water magnate and father of Luke's friend Biggs, Huff Darklighter, and they learned that the disk contained the location of an abandoned Imperial weapons cache. However, they had to compete with Imperial forces and Firth Olan's criminal gang for the cache, but the weapons instead went to local Tatooine government. Following the Tatooine debacle, it was found out that one of Rogue Squadron's most capable pilots, Plur Elo, was actually Princess Isplortakartha Estelio, heiress to the embattled world of Iatu 6, and the Rogues were requested to bring her home to help topple Iatu's pro-imperial regime puppeted by Moff Leonia Tavira. There was one problem, however. The leader of the People's Liberation Battalion, her brother, was actually an imposter, as she had killed her real brother, who tried to prevent her from escaping during a pro-imperial coup that killed her parents when she was just a child. But after assisting the PLB in storming the capital, she exposed him and took her rightful place as ruler of Iatu 6, that she had been running from her entire life. And while she'd no longer fly with the Rogues, she'd forever remain their friend and ally. During a mission to recover the survivors of a lost Bothan starliner on Marlev 4, the Rogues found themselves stranded and under constant attack by a group of Irrikine, being controlled by a mysterious sorcerer drawing dark side powers from a nearby Sith temple. And after losing Celestin pilot Delur Nep and Bith pilot Harine Ingray while destroying the temple, they were rescued by Plur and her forces. Rogue Squadron went on to play a monumental role in not only the liberation of the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk from Imperial clutches, but also the death of Grand Admiral Pachadi Sin. However, their most impressive feat at this point was their participation in the Battle of Brentaal IV, where Rogue Squadron went toe-to-toe with the dreaded 181st Imperial TIE Fighter Squadron, led by Baron Soontir Fel. But deliberate poor decisions during the battle, mostly orchestrated by Imperial Intelligence Director Isani Isard looking to embarrass Grand Vizier Sate Pestage, ended up costing them, and the New Republic was able to gain a foothold into the core worlds, where they could eventually move to take Coruscant. If that wasn't enough of a blow to the fragmented empire, Fel himself was captured at Brentaal IV, and agreed to defect on one condition: if the Rogues helped him rescue his wife, who was none other than Wedge's long-lost sister, who had left home, changed her name, and became a holofilm actress, Sile Antilles. The first step was getting Fel's family off of Imperial-occupied Corellia, but there was a snag, as Fel's nephew had been kidnapped. So they worked with Corpsec officers Koren Horn and Aiello Asiri to recover the child from the kidnappers, and Fel's family was placed under New Republic protection. Though they were unable to glean any information as to the whereabouts of Sile on Corellia, Fel kept his word and continued to fly with Rogue Squadron under the call sign Rogue 10. But many of the Rogues had their reservations about a man who had flown with the enemy for so many years and had downed some of their own pilots. Nevertheless, Fel proved faithful in subsequent dogfights and Spec Ops missions at Iatu 6, Axilla, and Ciutric, where the New Republic was attempting to negotiate with Grand Vizier Sate Pestage, and on Iatu 6, he brokered a deal with Leia Organa where he'd leave Coruscant's defenses open if they gave him 25 worlds of his own to control, plus protection from Isard, to which she reluctantly agreed. But despite Rogue Squadron's best efforts to recover Pestage when he was eventually captured, Prince Admiral Dalek Krenel, for all they knew, killed Pestage and took his 25 worlds, establishing the Ciutric hegemony, another Imperial warlord state for the New Republic to contend with. In 5 ABY, the Rogues got to work with Luke Skywalker once again, this time General Skywalker, following his promotion as a bit of a PR stunt to conjure images of the Jedi generals of old in the hearts and minds of galactic citizens, was commanding the entire assault on the volcanic world of Mindor, where Rogue Squadron with the New Republic 3rd Fleet aided Skywalker in the defeat of Lord Shadowspawn. This would be Luke's first and last stint as a New Republic general before retiring from the New Republic's armed forces for good to continue his Jedi journey. Not long after, Tycho Celchu volunteered to fly a scouting mission to Coruscant, but was captured, and for 3 months, Isard, now sitting ruler of the Empire since Pestage's defection, held Celchu at the infamous Luzankia prison, where she attempted to brainwash him and turn him into a sleeper agent. However, Tycho's resistance to the conditioning proved formidable, and she gave up on him, transferring him to a lower security prison where he escaped. While he was accepted back into the New Republic armed forces, Tycho was observed with great scrutiny, and had limited access to everything and had to be escorted at all times. He wasn't even permitted to fly X-Wings anymore, and was relegated to an old Z-95 headhunter with powered-down weapons, until such a time that they could be fully certain he wasn't a sleeper agent. Admiral Ackbar and Commander Salm would take no chances of a repeat of Deep Space Besh. By 6 ABY, Rogue Squadron was selected by Admiral Ackbar to be revitalized after so many pilots were rotated in and out of the squadron, died, or went missing in action, such as the case with Fel. So, Wedge was sent on a galaxy-wide publicity tour, while new pilots were trained by Wes Jansen and Hobby. Human pilots Bror Jace and Elise Delaret from Thyfera, Bespin native Rasadi Ener, Andorni Hui the Rhodian, Twi'lek lawyer Nawara Ven, Bothan Pashik Versik, Shistavanen Riv Shiel, Lujane Forge from Kessel, Oral Quirg the Gand, Biggs's cousin Gavin Darklighter, and a familiar face, Corran Horn, the former Corellia security officer, were among the pilots accepted into Rogue Squadron. The new Rogues got their first piece of action on their way to their new station on Talassia, when they were pulled out of hyperspace in the Torax system by an immobilizer interdictor cruiser, the Black Asp, while it was trying to intercept a New Republic smuggler, Mirax Terek, and her Pulsar Skate. Luckily, the Rogues were able to force the Black Asp to withdraw, and Corran's disabled X-Wing was in turn recovered by Mirax. Corran and Mirax would end up having an interesting relationship, seeing that it was his father, Valen Hal Horn, also a Corsic operative, who ended up putting her father, the well-known smuggler Booster Terek, in the spice mines of Kessel. And while the animosity was ever present at first, their relationship eventually blossomed into something cordial, and even romantic. After successfully recovering a downed starship on Hansara 3, the Rogues were attacked in the middle of the night by a squad of stormtroopers at their Talassia base, and if it wasn't for one of Corran Horn's hunches, which he'd later find was actually the Force, Rogue Squadron may have been done for. However, they did lose Lujane Forge, who was killed in her sleep, which deeply affected the squadron's morale. Conducting a retaliatory strike at Vladet, which yielded satisfactory results, the Rogues suffered a major defeat at the First Battle of Borleas, where two more Rogues, Andorni Hui and Peshk Versik, were lost, while Delaret, Nawara Ven, and Oral Quirg were gravely injured and needed Bacta therapy. The Second Battle of Borleas a few weeks later, on the other hand, proved more favorable for the New Republic, and the Rogues weren't even aware they were involved in another attack on Borleas until the battle concluded, as they were only given the codename Black Moon for their target. The Borleas campaign gave the New Republic the opening they needed to finally strike at Coruscant itself by 7 ABY. One problem remained, however. The planet's defenses, including its planetary shield, were still fully operational, and the New Republic did not have the logistical capabilities to muster fleets of the proportions needed to take a densely populated and heavily defended world like Coruscant. So the Rogues would go undercover and attempt to disable Coruscant's defenses from within, not without first releasing 16 of the galaxy's worst criminals, some of which Corran and his father put away themselves, from Kessel to wreak havoc in the city, and unsurprisingly, this would end up backfiring. With everything seemingly going wrong on Coruscant, Wedge gambled on a harebrained scheme, where they would attempt to create a massive lightning storm utilizing a 40-story tall construction droid, Z-95 headhunters, and one of Coruscant's orbital mirrors to create a massive lightning storm to knock out the planetary shield generator. Once the shields were gone, Ackbar's fleet poured out of hyperspace to attack the Star Destroyers and Golan defense stations in orbit, while the Rogues assisted New Republic ground troops. Imperial Center was finally liberated and officially renamed Coruscant. However, Corran Horn lost control of his headhunter and was presumed KIA. Corran was in all actuality very much alive and captured, taken by Isani Isard to Luzankia to suffer the same fate as Tycho, only this time she was sure to convert the Rogue. Meanwhile, back on the newly liberated Coruscant, Isard left a nasty surprise in the city's water supply, a bioweapon known as the Krytos virus that only targeted specific non-human species. Faced with Horn's state funeral, problems with xenophobia in the wake of the Krytos virus, pro-imperial insurgents called the Palpatine Liberation Front, and a trial for Tycho Celchu, now accused of being responsible for Corran's death, the New Republic had more on its plate than it bargained for. Scientists quickly discovered that the cure for the Krytos virus was Bacta, but Isard conveniently created a shortage of Bacta through her manipulation of the Zukfra Corporation, the galaxy's leading producer of Bacta on Thyfera. So, the rogues raided a space station in the Yogg-Dual system belonging to Warlord Zsinj to retrieve a cache of stolen Bacta. The rogues also journeyed to Ryloth in search for a spice known as Rilcor, which the scientists found that if mixed with Bacta can stretch out the supply a bit and deliver an even more effective Krytos vaccine. At Tycho Celchu's trial, Nawara Ven represented his comrade. However, things began to look grim when his star witness, Imperial agent and head of the PCIF, Kirtan Lore, was murdered by Corran Horn's former Coruscant partner Aayla Wasiri's husband, Direk Wasiri, who was one of Isard's sleeper agents, which also cost him his life. In the midst of the courtroom chaos, Corran Horn emerged at his own murder trial, and just as the horrifying realization began to sink in that Luzankia was on Coruscant and not some distant nameless world in the Rim, the PCIF orchestrated one of its attacks, and an entire Executor-class superstar destroyer, the Luzankia itself, thrusted from underneath Coruscant's city streets, killing thousands of innocent civilians and wreaking havoc. Despite attempts to intercept, Luzankia made it out of Coruscant's gravity well and jumped to hyperspace. With a mess to clean up, a vaccine to administer, and a rogue squadron pilot to acquit, the rogues were back together again, sans Elisi Delaret, who turned out to be the real Imperial spy. But when it was overheard that nothing would be done about Isard's newfound control over Thyfera due to her now being the legal head of state of the world, Rogue Squadron resigned from the New Republic, so they could take their own fight to Isard without political semantics. The Bacta War had begun. Taking up residence in the old Yogg-Dual space station they liberated from Zsinj, the rogues customized the paint jobs on their X-Wing starfighters and contacted smugglers Booster Terek and Talon Card for weapons and munitions. Booster wasn't too keen on the idea at first, seeing as he still had reservations about his daughter dating the son of a man who made him do hard time in the spice mines of Kessel, but he eventually warmed up to the idea, brokering a deal with Card himself for over 300 proton torpedoes for the rogues. Meanwhile, the rogues conducted raids on a few Bacta tankers and convoys belonging to the Zukfra Corporation, as Aayla Wasiri and other rogue affiliates worked with anti-Imperial forces on Thyfera itself. In an engagement at the remnants of Alderaan, the rogues managed to knock out a Victory Mark II class Star Destroyer, one of 4 Imperial vessels that was part of Isard's defense task force for Thyfera, and another vessel, the Immobilizer Interdictor Cruiser Aggregator, whom Isard was borrowing from High Admiral Teradok, cut its losses and retreated back to the Greater Maldruud. With their base of operations located, the Luzankia jumped towards Yogg-Dual with her remaining ships, but the rogues knew they wouldn't be able to take down a superstar destroyer by themselves, so while the Luzankia was on her way, Wedge and the rogues made haste for Thyfera, leaving Booster to deal with the SSD. The rogues took with them a mighty payload of proton torpedoes, while they left the targeting systems for the torps on the space station itself. So when the Superstar Destroyer arrived, the Luzankia had over 300 target locks on her, so she withdrew back to Thyfera, leaving the Star Destroyer Virulence, which promptly surrendered itself to Booster. The Yogg-Dual bluff paid off, but as soon as they entered Thyfera's gravity well, the Luzankia did as well. Fortunately, the arrival of Booster Terek, commanding the Virulence, and over 80 torpedo impacts on the Luzankia's hull forced her captain to see sense and surrender. Isard, meanwhile, was presumed dead when Corran Horn destroyed her escaping Lambda shuttle. Corran and Mirax were subsequently married on the bridge of the captured Luzankia by Wedge Antilles. With Isard presumed dead and the rogues now recommissioned after a convenient bureaucratic error failed to see their resignations go through, the New Republic turned its head towards the next biggest threat, the corpulent Warlord Zsinj and his Executor-class superstar destroyer Iron Fist. General Han Solo himself was put at the head of the anti-Zsinj task force, and Rogue Squadron was at his command. However, they would be absent their fearless leader, as Wedge requested permission from Akbar to create a new squadron that would perform not only a fighter squadron role, but also a self-sufficient commando group. The newly anointed Wraith Squadron, who deserve a whole transmission of their own, consisted of troublemakers, screw-ups, and other undesirables whose unique skills made them perfect spies, saboteurs, snipers, and infiltrators, apart from also being capable pilots, and included the likes of a former holofilm child star, a cybernetically augmented Gamorrean, and Admiral Akbar's own niece. The Wraiths infiltrated one of Zsinj's fleets in a captured CR-90 Corvette, and their intel and sabotage allowed Rogue Squadron, now led by Tycho Celchu, and a New Republic fleet to survive an ambush at Essien, which cost Zsinj his most capable admiral, Apwar Triget, and the Star Destroyer Implacable. At a subsequent engagement at the Imperial shipyards orbiting Kuat, the Wraiths assisted Rogue Squadron and Solo's fleet in keeping Zsinj from stealing an incomplete Executor-class Superstar Destroyer, Razor's Kiss, to add to his already powerful fleet. Yet Zsinj jumped to hyperspace when it was clear he'd lose his prize. The Rogues would return the following year to help take Kuat system for the Republic. The Wraiths and the Rogues clashed with Zsinj's elite Raptor forces at Levian II, Safaflor, Jusufet IV, Kidra V, Comkin V, and finally Salagas, where they seemingly destroyed Iron Fist with Zsinj presumably aboard. However, they would later find that the Iron Fist they destroyed was a decoy, cobbled from the remnants of Razor's Kiss with the words Iron Fist crudely painted on her bow, while Zsinj and the real Iron Fist entered hyperspace from within a visual obscuring orbital night cloak. Following Salagas, Wedge had since returned to command Rogue Squadron, while Wraith Squadron was absorbed into the New Republic Intelligence Service, and by 8 ABY, the real Zsinj had finally been found orbiting the planet Dathomir, where Solo, Leia, Luke, and the Singing Mountain Dathomir Witch Clan aided the final defeat of Zsinj and his Night Sister allies. In 9 ABY, the Rogues would face their most challenging foe yet, as the mysterious Grand Admiral Thrawn, a 13th out of the previously accounted for 12 Grand Admirals that the New Republic had since defeated, killed in action, or tried for their war crimes, had begun to unite the fledgling remnants of the Empire. The New Republic at this point had grown large and had stretched its resources too thin, to the point where several military vessels were being converted to cargo vessels to help bolster the New Republic's trade and supply lines. So this was the worst time for a renewed campaign to be mounted by their Imperial foes. Wedge and Rogue Squadron aided Han and Leia Organa Solo when they were ambushed by one of Thrawn's squads of Noghri Death Commandos on Bibvash, and later participated in the Battle of Sluis Van, where they valiantly attempted to stop Thrawn's forces from capturing New Republic warships awaiting refit at the Sluis Van shipyards, which ended with 43 crippled warships, a serious setback to the New Republic's war effort. Thrawn enacted his second plan to procure more warships for his growing forces, and located the long-lost Katana Fleet. However, the New Republic, looking to do the same, only just beat him to it before the Star Destroyer Judicator arrived. Rogue Squadron sprang into action, but for all their effort, the Empire still managed to make off with 185 of the 200 dreadnoughts within the Katana Fleet. Rogue Squadron fought subsequent engagements at Filvian and Cat Kristak before taking part in the fateful assault on the Bilbringi shipyards, where Thrawn met his demise as he was stabbed in the back by his own Noghri bodyguard, and in a repeat of the Battle of Endor, Captain Pellaeon assumed control of the Imperial forces and sounded the retreat. With the threat of Thrawn neutralized, the New Republic began focusing on Prince Admiral Krenel and his Seotric hegemony, with the prime directive of locating and freeing the remaining prisoners from Luzankia, mainly former Alliance General Jan Dodonna, who was presumed dead following the Imperial assault on Yavin Base, but later found to be alive during Koran's captivity. Meanwhile, the Rogues would get a visit from their old nemesis, when a brainwashed prisoner that Corran had lived with on Luzankia showed up and attempted to kill him, and further investigation revealed that Isard had not been killed on Thyfera after all. If that wasn't the worst, after an intense battle with hegemony forces at Lenade III, it was discovered that Krenel was attempting to construct his own superweapon, which the Rogues simply could not allow. However, after incurring heavy losses during an engagement at Disna, the Rogues were rescued by a force of TIE defenders belonging to Isard herself. Wedge was brought before his old enemy, and she revealed to him that bringing down Krenel was a common goal, as he was working with a clone of Isard that was made without her knowledge or approval. So the rogues posed as TIE pilots of Requiem Squadron looking to defect to the hegemony. While the rogues, in their guise as Requiem Squadron, aided New Republic forces during their strike at Ciutric, which saw the deaths of both Krenel and the Isard clone, the real Isard and her team of specialists infiltrated the Bilbringi shipyards where Luzankia was being refitted for the New Republic Navy. However, Aayla Wasiri was able to stop her from stealing the SSD and made sure she'd never trouble the rogues or the New Republic ever again. By 10 ABY, the New Republic faced a renewed Imperial offensive unlike any they have yet seen, this time not coming from the crumbling remnants on the Outer Rim, but from the deep core itself. Emperor Palpatine had allegedly returned, and he wanted his galaxy back, starting with Coruscant, where the rogues covered the New Republic's retreat. Out of necessity, Wedge Antilles reluctantly accepted a general's commission, despite turning down promotions for most of his career due to not wanting to trade his cockpit for a desk. However, he'd still be leading the rogues from the front, as the New Republic was now nearly in the same position it had been when it was still struggling as the Rebel Alliance. Wedge led the rogues to victory at the Battle of Mon Calamari against the reborn Palpatine's World Devastators, and then again at the Emperor's deep core throne world of Biss until his final death on Ossus, which resulted in the Imperials resorting back to warlordism, thus allowing the New Republic to regain Coruscant along with its foothold in the core. In 11 ABY, the Rogues and the New Republic were back to squashing warlords, but along with this came some changes to the squadron. Corran Horn briefly left the squadron to train as a Jedi at Luke's Praxium on Yavin 4. General Antilles, much to his chagrin, was now confined to the bridge of the newly refitted Luzankia, and Rogue Squadron itself was transformed into a mixed fighter squadron, sporting X-Wings, B-Wings, A-Wings, and the new E-Wing interceptors, which were used to great effect at the Battle of Theta against Karnor Jax's Crimson Empire movement. When Admiral Natassi Dalla emerged from her 11-year calm silence to wreak havoc on the New Republic, Antilles and the Rogues led a New Republic task force to take the Maw installation, and prevent Dalla from using a Death Star prototype, as well as another superweapon, the Sun Crusher, and thanks to them, Natassi's dreams of a reinvigorated empire under her control were crushed. When Mirax was taken captive by the former Imperial Moff-turned-pirate Leona Tavira, Corran Horn enlisted the help of General Antilles and the Rogues to help rescue her, and with help from Booster Terek and his Star Destroyer-turned-mobile casino, the Errant Adventure, they defeated Tavira's pirate gang, the Invids, at the Battle of Suzefi. In 12 ABY, the Rogues aided Jedi Master Luke Skywalker and Jedi Knight Kyle Katarn in their struggle against the Dark Jedi Dasan's Empire Reborn movement, most notably at the Battle of Yavin 4, where Rogue Squadron bought time for Katarn to sabotage the internal systems of Dasan's flagship, the Doomgiver, and helping bring down the Goliath vessel. Not long after, the now united Imperial Remnant under Supreme Commander Gilad Pellaeon and his Superstar Destroyer Reaper conducted one last concentrated offensive against the New Republic, with the goal of recapturing the former Imperial administrative world of Orinda. General Antilles in the Luzankia and Rogue Squadron under Captain Celchu launched a counteroffensive after Pellaeon captured the ill-defended Orinda and the 6 other neighboring star systems, clashing with Pellaeon at Darkon, Tiraval Pakor, Arakko, Tyan, Oberdan, and finally at Orinda itself, where, if it weren't for the Rogues destroying Pellaeon's interdictor cruisers, Wedge may have very well went down with the Luzankia if she wasn't able to jump to hyperspace. A year later, in 13 ABY, Wedge, Tycho, Wes, and Hobby would represent the New Republic as ambassadors to the planet of Adumar, who the New Republic wished to bring into their fold, as the Adumari held starfighter pilots in great reverence. However, in order to do this, the Rogues had to best Tur Fanir of the 181st Squadron representing the Imperial Remnant in a series of dogfights, and successfully won over the Adumari. From 14 to 17 ABY, Rogue Squadron aided Jedi Padawan Jaden Korr on a mission to Krill Dor, which would aid in the defeat of the Disciples of Ragnos, and after were attached to General Garmbel Iblis's fleet, and participated in numerous skirmishes against the fledgling Imperial Remnant. By 19 ABY, the New Republic was embroiled in the Kaamas Document crisis, and on the brink of civil war, which was ignited by an anti-Pelion faction within the Imperial Remnant led by Moff Disra, who was against Pelion's desire for peace with the New Republic. And the Rogues not only helped hold the New Republic together, but also flew against Disra's forces at the Battle of Yaga Minor. The real Kaamas Document was soon found by Luke and Mara Jade during their expedition into the Unknown Regions, which helped smooth rising tensions with the New Republic. Disra's plot was exposed, and a peace treaty was signed between Pelion and New Republic Chief of State Ponk Gaversum. The signing of the Pelion-Gaversum Treaty was the end of an era for Rogue Squadron, and soon after, the veteran Rogues, Wedge Antilles, Tycho Celchu, Koran Horn, Hobby, and Wes Jensen put in for their retirement from the New Republic Armed Forces. Not before one last mission, however. At the wedding of Luke and Mara Jade on Coruscant, the Rogues served as Luke's groomsmen, protecting the Jedi Master during a cantina brawl at his bachelor party, as well as defending the wedding itself from Imperial interlopers. Command of Rogue Squadron was handed over to Gavin Darklighter, who, in 25 ABY, led the Rogues through the horrific invasion of the extragalactic Yuuzhan Vong, flying their new T-65A3 X-Wings against Vong Coral Skippers. During the war's early months, Rogue Squadron engaged Vong forces in several skirmishes on the Outer Rim, and developed a strategy for getting shots through the Coral Skippers' sophisticated shield analog, which were adopted by the rest of the New Republic's pilots. Suffering casualties in these skirmishes, Jaina Solo, daughter of Han and Leia Organa Solo, was brought on to Rogue Squadron under the call sign Rogue 11, and even Wedge Antilles and Tycho Celchu re-emerged from retirement to fly with the Rogues once more from time to time. Rogue Squadron battled the Yuuzhan Vong at Dubrillion, Dantooine, Cernpadal, Ithor, where Jedi Knight Koran Horn challenged the Vong commander to single combat, Kalarbra, Cernpadal again, Talfaglio, the fall of Coruscant, Orleas, and finally at the retaking of Coruscant until the Vong's surrender at the Sikhat Accords in 29 ABY. During the Swarm War in 36 ABY, where the once-thought extinct Killik species entered into a territorial dispute with the Chiss Ascendancy, both Rogue Squadron and Wraith Squadron participated in the Battle of Tanupe between the Galactic Alliance, the New Republic successor government, allied with the Chiss against the dark side-influenced Gorog Killik Nest and their misguided Jedi joiners, who were subsequently freed from Gorog after its perceived destruction. In 40 ABY, the Second Galactic Civil War kicked off between the disgruntled Five Worlds government of the Corellia system and the GA, and Jaina Solo served as rogue leader during the opening blockade. However, tensions with her brother, Jacen Solo, who had assumed command of the Special Galactic Alliance Guard, prompted her to send in her resignation. Former rogue leader Wedge Antilles was forced out of retirement when he and his family were kidnapped by GA agents to keep him from joining his homeworld of Corellia, which, after his escape, he did just that. However, Admiral Antilles vehemently disagreed with how Corellian President Thraken Sal Solo wanted to conduct this war, and was forced to resign. When Jacen Solo, or Darth Kydos, now under the influence of Lumaya, assumed control of the GA in a coup, the Jedi split from the Alliance and formed a coalition with the likes of the Hapes Consortium, the Wookiees of Kashyyyk, and the Imperial Remnant, where former rogues including Wedge and his daughter, Sile, formed Requiem Squadron. And at the Battle of Centerpoint Station, former rogues went toe-to-toe with current members of Rogue Squadron and came out victorious on the other side. Though, the victory was bittersweet after having to shoot down pilots from the unit that they formed. Eventually, Kydos was defeated, and peace, along with the legally elected government of the Galactic Alliance, was briefly restored, and with it, Rogue Squadron would remain instated within the GA military for the next 100 Galactic Standard years. Circa 130 ABY, Rogue Squadron was still one of the most elite starfighter squadrons within the Galactic Alliance. However, they had since replaced their antique X-Wings with the more modern CF-9 Crossfire starfighter. In the aftermath of the Sith Imperial War, Darth Krayt had seized control of the Imperial remnant from Emperor Roan Fel, which put both the Fel loyalists and the GA in a position where they had to conduct a guerrilla war against his galaxy-spanning Sith Empire, culminating in the Second Imperial Civil War. The rogues themselves were stationed on board Admiral Gar Stazi's flagship, the Indomitable, just like in the days of Admiral Akbar, and were comprised by the likes of Joram Bey, Ronto, Anj Dal, Andurgo, Monia Gahan, and even a Manda-LOREan, Hondo Kar. But when Indomitable herself was destroyed during the Battle of Mon Calamari, Rogue Squadron found themselves procuring a new flagship for the Admiral, and stole a new Imperial Superstar Destroyer, the Imperious, first of her class, straight from the Mon Calamari dry docks. Rogue Squadron, in their crossfires, faced off against Sith Imperial Predator-class starfighters on battlefields like Raltir, Napdu, Mon Calamari again, Faline, Tevas, and finally Coruscant, where Darth Krayt was defeated, the balance of power was restored, and the forces of the Galactic Alliance, Fel Empire, and the Jedi Order united into the Galactic Federation Triumvirate, to bring a new era of peace and stability to the galaxy. For well over a century, the pilots of Rogue Squadron, whether they were flying for the Rebel Alliance, New Republic, or Galactic Alliance, were the poster boys and girls for the fight against tyranny itself, and perhaps go down in history as one of the greatest, if not the greatest starfighter squadron that ever flew.
This transmission was commissioned by JTribs1997 on Patreon. If you have any suggestions for future transmissions, don't be afraid to drop a comment. Special thanks to my patrons, Wildcat144, Zexend, JTribs1997, Wirefox Terrier, Dave the Brave, Zim the Despot, Matt Patton, Trav, Hawk2274, Cal's Garada, Angry Mutt, Chris Evans, Mayo4, Moonman, Noah Shane 45, The Framinator, Logan Tyler, and Alexander Williams. If you'd like to support this channel, and perhaps even commission your own video topic, please visit my Patreon to find out how. Link is in the description. In the meantime, keep your comm channels open for future transmissions, and don't forget to subscribe. Tad Larkin, out.